In a world where giant monsters and humans collide, the human and creature teamed up to create the greatest sport of all time, monster wrestling. These rare beasts wrestle for the glory of their hometowns and cities, fighting for the World Monster Wrestling Championship. And it was the town of Stoker on that gave us the greatest wrestling team of all time, Rayburn and coach Jimbo Coyle. But tragedy happened when Rayburn and coach Jimbo Coyle were lost in the sea and presumed dead. But today we see the people of Stoker excited about their new champion, a shark octopus-like monster called Tentacular, who will be fighting King George. In an ever-busy and crowded scene, we see a young girl named Winnie, who happens to be the daughter of coach Jimbo Coyle, very excited as she runs through the crowd, giving high fives to her friends as she went to see her mother Maggie, who was selling drinks for the wrestling match. Almost the whole town gathers to watch this fight, not minding closing their shops. The announcer introduces the main event, Tentacular versus King George. King George is a formidable opponent, known for his brute strength and aggressive tactics. The crowd roars as the two monsters enter the ring, ready for an epic showdown. The match begins, and it's immediately clear that King George is giving Tentacular a tough fight. Despite his agility and skill, Tentacular is struggling to counter King George's raw power. Winnie is a major monster wrestling enthusiast and has the same spirit she got from her dad. During the match, Tentacular is getting beat by King George, but Winnie notices that George has a tell. He licks his lips before going in for a hit. So she runs through the crowd and climbs up close enough to tell Coach Siggy Martin and Tentacular about it. With that, Tentacular begins to change his approach. He uses his tentacles to dodge King George's attacks and counter with swift, precise moves. The crowd watches in awe as Tentacular regains control of the match, showcasing his unique style and clever tactics. In a dramatic and intense sequence, Tentacular executes a complex move that entangles King George and pins him to the ground. The referee counts down, and Tentacular emerges victorious. The stadium erupts in cheers, and Winnie beams with pride, knowing she played a crucial role in the win. As the celebration continues, Tentacular takes the microphone and addresses the crowd. He thanks his fans for their unwavering support and expresses his gratitude to Winnie and her late father for their mentorship. However, just when everyone expects him to pledge his loyalty to Stoker, Tentacular shocks everyone with an unexpected announcement. He reveals that he has decided to leave Stoker to pursue bigger opportunities in the world of monster wrestling, explaining that he wants to compete in larger arenas and face new challenges, leaving the town and its beloved stadium behind. The crowd is stunned and heartbroken, and Winnie is visibly upset. The scene ends with a bittersweet note as Tentacular walks out of the arena, leaving Winnie and the townspeople to grapple with the reality of his departure. The town gathers where the mayor brings in a councilwoman to explain to the townspeople that without a champion monster, they can't have wrestling tournaments and they can't keep the stadium since it will be losing them money. A rich jerk named Jimothy Brett Chadley III is buying the stadium and wants to demolish the stadium and put up a parking lot. Winnie stands up and passionately protests against the idea. She argues that the stadium is not just a building, but a symbol of the town's spirit and her father's legacy. She pleads with the mayor and councilwoman to reconsider. Despite her heartfelt plea, the mayor and councilwoman are unmoved, citing the lack of a monster wrestler to bring in revenue as the core issue. Winnie is deeply worried about the situation. Winnie decides to visit the now empty stadium. As she walks through the silent corridors and stands, she has vivid flashbacks of her father, Jimbo Coyle, training monsters and imparting his wisdom. She recalls his passion, dedication, and the love he had for the sport and the community. These memories ignite a spark within her. Inspired by her father's legacy, Winnie rushes back home and pulls out her father's old playbook. Determined, she resolves to find a new monster wrestler who can fight for Stoker and save the stadium. With renewed purpose, she sets out on a journey to discover a monster who can rise to the challenge. Winnie travels to the town of Pittsmore, where they lost their monster champion and hold illegal monster fights in an abandoned warehouse. There was a fight going on, and so Winnie brought out a book to write down some things she noticed. The fight ended, and Winnie was seen talking to several monsters, trying to convince them to come to Stoker with her and fight. As a bonus, she will be their coach. She always ends her talk with, "It's a win-win, Winnie," but they all end up laughing at her and refusing her offer. Winnie was frustrated and sat at the bar drinking when a guy started talking to her and encouraged her. He also showed her Steve, who has never won a fight, but yet he keeps betting on him. Winnie was surprised and remembered Steve as Rayburn Jr. Steve, who happens to be Rayburn's son that she recognizes from when she and Steve were kids, is part of the underground wrestling matches where he has to lose every night. Winnie keeps trying to get his attention, unaware that Steve is supposed to lose the match to Clonk, or else their boss, Lady Mayhem, will be unhappy. Winnie causes Steve to accidentally knock Clonk out, which loses Lady Ma'am all her earnings for the night. She orders Steve to come up with the money immediately or suffer worse consequences. Steve doesn't want to join Winnie, but with no other options, he reluctantly joins her and returns to Stoker. Winnie and Steve walked from Pittsmore to Stoker as Steve carried Winnie on him. They arrived at Stoker and went to the stadium before going to the training center. Steve, amazed how things were still the same, had a flashback to the time he told his father that he wanted to be just like him when he grows up, and the father told him that living up to the Rayburn name will take lots more than some fancy dance moves. It was revealed that Steve had always loved dancing. Winnie had to call Steve back to reality. They both had an argument but apologized, stating that if they don't do anything, the stadium will be destroyed, and that's all of their dads they have left. Winnie left and told Steve to rest, that training starts tomorrow. The next morning, she rushes out of bed, eager to start the training. Her mother enters to encourage her, reminding her of her father's legacy. Winnie returns to give her mother a kiss, but her mother hands her the key to her father's aircraft. Surprised and grateful, Winnie thanks her mother and takes the key. Winnie struggles initially, but eventually manages to control the aircraft. Winnie arrives at Steve's place and finds him still sleeping. She tries to wake him up, ready to start their training journey together. Winnie starts trying to train Steve bright and early. He refuses to do any actual training until he gets a match. Winnie later takes him to a cargo ship where monster fights are held, and he goes up against Ramarilla. When she informs him that it's winner takes all, and he won't get a cent if he loses, Steve attempts to put in some effort. Per Winnie's instructions, he runs around until Ramarilla starts to get tuckered out, and Steve ends up winning. However, sports commentators like Mark Remy and Lights Out McNulty consider the match to be one of the worst matches of the week due to how lame it was. Winnie was upset because their match was tagged as the worst match of the week, but Steve was happy because he was on TV. Winnie continues trying to put Steve through extensive physical training, but ultimately he knows he can't be exactly like his dad, and that's why he left Stoker in the first place. Winnie soon learns that Steve has a passion for dancing, so she tries to incorporate his moves into his fighting skills. They start getting into matches where Steve is able to win by using his dance skills, which fans are divided on as to whether it is an interesting new method or if it is just pointless showboating. Winnie got Steve a match with a huge monster. She also brought Steve's monster friend to help Steve train. After many attempts, Steve was able to lift the monster friend up, which means he will be able to fight the enormous monster. On the night of the match, Steve was being beaten by this enormous monster, but Winnie reminded him of his training, and Steve was able to lift the monster up and throw him into the crowd. The monster couldn't get up, and Steve was announced as the winner. Steve and Winnie were interviewed live on the Mac and Mark show. Winnie, who was nervous at the beginning, confidently announced that they are ready for their next match, and it will be in Stoker. Winnie challenged any monster for a match. Winnie got a call from King George's coach to have a match and was happy. Winnie and Steve started singing and dancing on their way back to the training center, and when they got there, they found workers moving things out. The councilwoman told them that the mayor is about to sign the deal with Jimothy. Winnie and Steve ran to stop the mayor from signing the deal, but it was too late. It is then revealed that Tentacular orchestrated the buying of the stadium because he feels that he will always be seen as second best to Rayburn, so he is willing to destroy his legacy by having the stadium demolished. This leaves Winnie and Steve feeling defeated. Steve returns to Pittsmore with the money for Lady Ma'am, ready to return to his unfulfilling job. However, just before the match, he looks in his locker and sees pictures of himself and his father having a good time together. Steve finds Winnie back in Stoker and tells her he's ready to fight, not like his dad, but for himself, and that he liked how winning felt. With that, Winnie hugs him and says they will do it her way, but first they have to go to the stadium. Steve takes her to the stadium as a crowd has gathered to watch Tentacular blow it up. Just before it happens, Steve rips out the explosive cables and comes before the crowd to reveal himself as Rayburn Jr. He challenges Tentacular to a fight in order to save the stadium. Fans and news outlets, and even Lady Ma'am, are all in disbelief at Steve's true identity, but Tentacular agrees to the fight. Winnie goes back to training Steve, and he now has even more support than before. The people of Stoker come to watch and cheer him as he prepares to fight Tentacular. Winnie planned lots of obstacles and told Steve to run through and get to where her dad's statue was. After many attempts, Steve was able to get through to her father's statue. The night of the big match arrives. Steve gets nervous and doesn't think he can live up to his father's legacy, but Winnie gives him a rousing coach speech to get him pumped up. During the first round, Steve is able to dodge Tentacular's attacks through dancing, making for a less than thrilling fight. In the second round, Tentacular is able to get more hits in as he counters Steve's dance moves. Tentacular, using some dancing moves, had Steve tied up with his tentacles. Steve received several hits from Tentacular, which left him in bad shape. C tries to urge Winnie to throw in the towel because Tentacular could easily destroy Steve. She almost agrees to it, not wanting to see him get hurt, but Steve picks himself up and tells her they just need a new strategy. In the third round, Steve gives it his all and manages to pull off a high enough jump to come down on Tentacular, but they end up knocking each other out, and a chair flies out and hits Jimothy. Both of them appear to be down, and the crowd was in shock. Winnie started calling out to Steve, but he was unconscious. Maggie, Winnie's mom, who was standing at the coach stand with Winnie, started clapping. Soon everyone started clapping, making a sound like music. Steve started moving his toes. As the clapping intensifies, Steve got up, ready to dance. Tentacular got up, and Steve gave him his signature smackdown using his bomb. Tentacular was trapped under Steve, and the referee counted, and Steve won. Steve was finally announced as the new champion. Tentacular is taken away in humiliation, but Siggy congratulates Winnie and sees her as being as great a coach as her dad was. The crowd goes wild, and even Lady Ma'am, who was watching from her warehouse, shows pride in Steve. Maggie was proud of Winnie and her monster Steve. Steve was given the big belt as the new champion. Mac, the sports commentator, asks Steve what he feels like after winning, but Steve and Winnie echo, dancing. The stadium is saved, and everyone celebrates with a dance party. This is a 2021 movie called Rumble. What do you think about this movie? Write in the comment below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.